but just 1 minute. Okay. Hey everybody, Bree with Apolla here. It is Beyond the Steps Friday at 2 p.m. That means we have another exciting episode for you. We are talking about how do educators and coaches maintain the balance between artistry and technique for performance athletes. And we have none other than the amazing Kelsey Nelson Lack here with us today. Kelsey, thanks for coming back and joining us. We love having you on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, what better way than to kick off the weekend with Kelsey? So, we're talking a lot about this. This is a hot button issue that we see in a lot of the dance teacher networks. There really never seems to be a resolution, and you've got strong opinions on both sides as to what is appropriate as far as artistry and technique and their place in the dance world, specifically in the competitive space, right, and the professional performance realm as well. So Kelsey is going to share all of her knowledge with us on that. She has an amazing program. But in the meantime, before I introduce Kelsey and give you a little bit of her background, I want to make sure you're sharing this conversation within your community. We're on Facebook, on YouTube, and live. So this is Beyond the Steps. We're a show that highlights topics that are impacting like racism, gender and equity, sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, and of course, dance medicine and science. So pick one question and we dive in with a guest expert, hence Kelsey, and we ask for their resources. And we're giving you evidence-based resources, homework that you can take back to your programs and your students, and hopefully see an improvement of having happier, healthier, safer dance for all, because that is what we all need and want. So Kelsey, 25 years of dance experience ranging from major motion pictures to teaching students all North America. She judges for prestigious dance competitions all across the country and has created her own conditioning program for dancers that she received her bachelor's of science in dance management from Oklahoma City University. Kelsey, thank you again. We appreciate it. How is the season for?
It's been going hectic. There's a
Yeah.
lot going on. But it's great. I'm so thankful for just every opportunity, whether it's teaching, choreography, getting to sit down and have conversations like this. Everything is great.
Yeah.
Just busy. But again, thankful for all of those opportunities.
Yeah. And we were just talking, like, I mean, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It is coming up with some hot at the end of this year into the beginning of 2023. But for you, a lot of people I talked to, they said last year was not as it was going to be, right? Coming off the pandemic year, you've gone through some changes as an industry. For you, what are the biggest changes you've seen in dance and your studio program this year compared to years?
I mean, I think when we first came back from the pandemic, everybody was all in because
Yeah.
there was just so much that still wasn't available. And so it was great. Like, really feeling like everybody was super, super invested.
Yeah.
And then last year, because everything started to be back, I think people like teeter tottered completely the other direction. And it
Yeah.
was like trying to get people to show up was a struggle because they were going to concerts and doing school games and doing all this stuff that they couldn't do the year before.
Yeah.
So I feel like this year we're trying to find that medium again. But I do feel like it's harder to really like push like attendance and a schedule and those kinds of things because people got so used to not having those commitments that
Yeah.
that's like that like balance of trying to find like holding them accountable and be like their commitments but also allowing them to do those other things because at any moment who knows what could happen. So I think it's just that like balance piece that's like the biggest struggle for me personally.
But I think we all have this sense of empathy that we want to live their life and have some fun, but at the same time, we want to run the programs that we want to run in our studios and in our athletic activities that we have, and hold them to those commitments because that's what sets right? So I completely and respect that. For all of you out there just joining, this is Beyond the Steps. I'm Bree with Apolla. We are talking with about how to find that balance between artistry and technique for performance athletes. So I want to get started and jump right in. Dance is the only sport that not only requires extreme athleticism, is one of the hardest jobs in America, or one hardest job in America, I should say.
Right.
But you also have to look beautiful and effortless, right? Which there is a little bit of a double standard there that comes with a very unique set of challenges. Do you find your students feel this pressure and them back from taking risks?
Yes. We were actually just having this conversation last night. In rehearsal, we have it regularly. It's something that not only my students, but I just think a lot of students struggle with. And I think even creativity, like creative wise, as a choreographer and a teacher, like I think I even struggle with that too, finding that balance of really pushing them to work to achieve technical excellence, but also giving them the freedom and the space to discover who they are and what they have to say. And so I think that balance is really, really challenging, and especially for children to understand that. That's a very deep concept that I feel like as we age and take steps into the professional world, or coaching, we can start to understand that. But within kids, it's very hard to get that balance. So I see it in my students when I go and set pieces, to really technically excellent and have that artistic freedom.
It's so what age do you find that they start really difference between the two?
Um, Mid high school, I would say, like, probably 14, 15 years old, where they are starting to be confident in their training. I think once they can develop that confidence in their technical proficiency, then they start to understand that, like, this technique is there to support the artistry, but the technique is not the artistry of the dance. It supports it, but I think that there has to be both, and they start to finally trust that when they get into high school. Trust is a really big thing, a topic that I talk about, that they have to trust their training, they have to trust their bodies, they have to trust their knowledge, and they have to know they spend hours upon hours in the studio training so that they can confidently go out on stage and have that freedom to not have to think about the prep for the pirouette or think about how they're going in or out, and trust that they know how to do that so that they can fully be present in the artistic performance once they hit the stage.
And I feel like that should be on a t-shirt. Technique supports the artist. Like that is so true. And I think that's the hardest thing to get is to just get out of their own head, and just perform and do it from here, right? So
Yeah.
there's often a fierce debate if dance is a sport or an art. We've always maintained with Apollo it can be both. But what are your thoughts on that conversation? And do you think it's too successfully,
Yeah,
I should say?
yes, I absolutely do think that they can be married. Um, at the end of the day, if you really like look at what defines a sport and look at what defines an art, um, dance to me fits more in that art category.
Hmm.
However, depending on what avenue you go down, or whether you're doing like dance team, whether you're focusing on being in a company, there's a lot of different avenues you can go down where they're going to lean more towards one side or the other. And I don't think that there's any wrong answer, because I think that there's a place and a style and a movement that is right for everyone. So there's dance studios that focus a lot on the tricks and the technique, and the movement in between might not be as strong, but those skills are really powerful. And then you have other studios that might really focus on the artistry, and maybe their technique is not as strong, but like their performance of a piece really like speaks to you on like a personal level. I don't think that's wrong either. That they can both happen. Um, what I find most beautiful is when you have an athletic artist. So when you have somebody that has
Yes.
really great athleticism and can do it in the form of art. So I think they both happen. Just depends on how you approach it. But at the end of the day, dance is an art.
Yeah, thank you. So
Mhm.
wait into my next question because this is it, right? So it's so hard to know what judges want in the competitive space. We're talking about, I mean, this is a really a conversation, but dancers specifically, that's where art is. That's where kind of the root of where we started as a company. That's Kelsey's background. So for dancers, very subjective. You can look at a piece and react to
Yes.
looking for something. The choreographer specific intent in mind, and the person that watches it takes something completely different. So everyone has a different opinion about what on top when those final scores come into play, because although I'll say like we just do this for the love of it, let's be honest. Wow, and you want to win, right? Most people that end result, right? And it's not the most important thing, but like let's call a spade, right? So win over, or should artistry and creativity and be that tiebreaker to decide who that top group? Do you think one outweighs the other?
Um, I think I think it's all in why you do competition. Like that's not the answer, but why you do competition.
Yeah.
And I think that there can be different motivations behind it. I know personally, I this year have kind of thrown caution to the wind, and I don't really care what somebody's looking for. I created from a space of what felt right to me, and what felt right for my dancers and what challenged them. Um,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, it it's going to be what it's going to be, in my personal opinion. That's if we win, great. But if we don't and we did something that pushed ourselves, then that's like what's most exciting to me in terms of like me personally. When it comes to like who should win, um, I ooh, it's a
I
tough
don't even
one.
mean win, but
Um,
like,
yeah,
sometimes you see a big
I
variation in the scores, right?
right. Yeah.
Sometimes you'll hear people commiserating over how that, and we did, X, Y, and Z in our piece, and every what
Right.
dance, what how the score is.
Right. So
So, but
I
the
have a
scoring,
yeah, I have a few ex gymnasts that are now dancers at the studio. And so I reference their gymnastics quite often, because that's very black and white. It's
yeah,
very like, these are the skills you do, this is the score you get. Whoever did the skills the best, they win. Um, and I think that if we lean too much to that in dance, it's going to take away from that freedom and that creativity and that like boundary pushing that performers and choreographers and creatives are able to do in dance. So I think if we solely just look at the technique part, then it's going to lend itself more towards like a sport event. Whereas if we're bringing that artistry into it, I think that it makes it more personal. I think it
yeah,
makes more of a human connection. And I tell the kids all the time, like, no, you're not going to change anybody's life by kicking your face. Like, they're going to be impressed. They're going to be
right,
like, oh, that was cool. But you're not going to like impact somebody in the long term by
right,
kicking your face or doing 7 pirouettes. Like, nobody's going to remember that because it's just a skill. Whereas if you really are vulnerable and put yourself out there and are not afraid, that could change somebody's life by watching you do that. And so that to me, I think is way more important. And I always say I could go to the 7-Eleven and teach who works there how to do a pirouette, but in getting them to understand
Great
how
teacher. Yeah.
to how to be vulnerable and be honest and be open, that takes a true artist, somebody that's really passionate about being in this field. So I think the artistry part is much harder to teach, it's more personal, and it really takes somebody that is truly loving what they're doing to be able to do that. So to me, I would reward that and connect with that more than somebody being able to do turns into an aerial, into a back head spring, into something else. Like,
I hear you. Yes.
like,
It's true. And again, this is very subjective. So everybody that's watching, you're jumping. This is a conversation and this is a perspective, but it's not the only. Two things jump to my head because I know, any dance educators, teachers, directors, whoever read thing. Number one, that's great. Like for you, you're leaning on 25 years of experience that, you feel very in your self earned, right? But like the right to like, I'm gonna just throw caution to the wind and I'm gonna do my vision, I'm gonna put it out there. Do right, but what about that fine line of like keeping the parents happy? Because you and I were talking before we started about, you have always that small group of parents that, right, like, well, they're that and this is getting top points, right? Like, so how do you keeping the parents happy and staying true to who you are and what your vision is for the season?
I think I think what's really important, number one, is the culture within the studio. It's
Mhm.
really hard to explain and talk to and involve the parents in like the bigger picture of what we're doing, and creating artists and to really take on challenges and not be afraid of it not going well. Um, so that's something that I've worked really hard on. So I think number one, it's a culture that needs to be created. Like, why are you competing? Why are we doing this? And so that, and then you're still going to have parents that are like, well, this one's winning or this one's doing this, and so on and so forth. Um, and I think being able to point out that growth looks more looks like more than just doing more pirouettes or jumping higher or kicking your leg higher. So
And
I
that's a
had a
hard thing to
conversation with
communicate with people that don't know
yes.
what they're looking.
Yeah.
9 times out of
And
10, parents have never danced. Know what they're saying. Like they don't really, they just know what their eyes
yeah,
are seeing, right?
right. Right. And so, I had a conversation with a parent at the beginning of this year, and I was like, if that's your only gauge for growth, you're only in one column, and there's tons of different columns that you could be looking at. Like, is your student communicating more verbally, willing to try different things that they weren't doing before? Are they practicing at home when they weren't doing that before? Are they asking to take extra classes that they weren't doing before? These are all things that are pushing, try to expand, and that shows growth. And it's not just like the technical part. So the technical
Yeah.
part is one aspect, but it is not all of the aspects. um,
Yeah.
and so I think being able to explain that to parents and have them be able to see all the different areas, is really really important. Also, as a artistic director for a studio, or a studio owner, or even a teacher, finding the competitions that support your mission as a dance studio. So if you are really in the game of tricks and skills and all of that kind of stuff, really trying to find those competitions that cater towards that. Or if you're really in the game of like the artistry and the creativity and looking for competition that to lend themselves more towards that avenue. Also studios, we there's a great community of studios down here in Florida that have very like-minded studio owners and missions and visions, and
Yeah.
we competitions because we all have that same desire to push for more creativity and less about the end result. And so that
Yeah.
makes competition super exciting and fun because same page
Yeah.
rather than being that outlier studio that might be like all about the like artistic part and
Yes.
take a piece to a competition that's like driving home like all the like skills and tricks. So I think it's just being able
Yeah.
to find those two are going to help go and develop in the direction that you're wanting to go in.
Yeah. So then do you ever recommend where you're adjusting choreography throughout the season to match that you're going to? Because I haven't seen it much, but I've done people doing those things of like making tweaks in choreography because they know. Do you find that's productive, or do you advise against that?
I have never done that. I'll change choreography
Of
or
course,
it
yeah.
doesn't like feel right. And I'll ask the kids like, how did that part feel on stage or so on and so forth. Um, I definitely though think that throughout a season, depending on when you do your choreography, um, if you do an outside chore, and as your dancers develop strength and develop technical efficiency throughout the season, being able to tweak and adjust. So, I mean, I've put things in dances and it's like way beyond what my kids can do to challenge them, and
Yeah.
then I'll rein it back. And then I'll be like, okay, we're going to like a competition where I know like we're going with against some like talented studios, and I want you to push yourself to get this technical
Yeah.
element, or I want you to put really try to strive to accomplish this, and I might make it a little harder or whatever. It's not that I'm changing whole sections of dances, but like let's go from a triple to a quad.
Of course.
Let's go
Yeah.
from, four of you doing this leap to six of you. Like trying to like challenge them, not so much to win, but to really push them to reach their potential.
You're talking about oftentimes these kids have been doing the same choreography long that once they master that, you want to keep it exciting for them. You want to keep pushing. So we get that. I think it's a strategy of like, we know we're going to this one, so we have to add more of this in that, can backfire sometimes. So I'm glad that you said that. For those just joining, I'm Bree with Apolla. This We're chatting with Kelsey Nelson Lack, who is a renowned educator across the United States. She judges. She has a lot to say and a lot of experience to back it up. We're talking today about how to balance the line of tech and artistry with performance athletes. It's a hot button, especially as we get ready to start into competition season for the 22-23 and for whatever other performance athletics you might be doing out there. Really helpful conversation to apply. Um, Kelsey, as an educator, I think I think to be a true dance artist, you have to have some type of respect for the technical skill and foundation that an art built on, right? Do you think it's possible to be an impressive artist? Because you were talking about, it takes a special person to be that without having mastered that foundation. I think you can do it that way.
I think that everybody's journey looks a little bit different.
Yeah.
However, I do believe that the foundation is what you can build the house off of.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a strong foundation that you're developing over time, then the artistry that you're trying to put on top might be phenomenal and be beautiful. But if you don't have that strong foundation to support it, then there's going to be areas where it becomes weak and it can fall down.
Yeah.
So I think that being able to really understand your body, understand how it works, understand the science behind dance, then gives you that freedom to create that artistry on top of a strong foundation. So I don't think it's something that is impossible to create, you know, artistry and create a phenomenal dancer without all of that technical
Yeah.
support. However, I think that those are probably very rare cases. I think you can start at any age. I think you can do it, you know, you can have that artistry and build and develop that foundation. I think you can have the foundation and build on the artistry. I think it all just depends on what your journey looks like. But at the end of the day, you do have to have that foundation to be able to build off of.
Thank you. So we are live on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We're talking about how to balance the line between art and athleticism and technique with your performance athletes. Make sure these platforms that you are liking our pages, that you are entering your comments, share your experiences. Cal is happy to answer any questions you have today. This is a great time to get back as we begin the 22-23 competition. So take advantage and pop those questions in the chat on any platform. If you're on YouTube, click that subscribe button to get more Beyond the Steps. We're live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So, Kelsey, do competitive dancers need acrobatic training nowadays to succeed in the competitive dance space? You see a lot of it in some of the top tier competitors. We talked about this a little earlier. Um, but there's conversation on how much of a place acrobatics have in the dance world. Do your students take acro at the studio, and what does that look like in terms of your program?
So we have an optional acro class, so it's not required.
Yeah,
Um, and it's actually on Fridays.
yeah,
So a lot of our younger students take it. And then once we start creeping up into high school, we have a small handful of students that take it because they weren't training in it when they were younger. So it isn't
right.
something
It's
that
a
they
little
are,
harder. Yeah,
yeah, jumping into. Um, I think that there is a benefit to it, and I don't think that you have to have it. I growing up, acro was not a thing. So like
no.
I never learned how to do an aerial or anything like that. I'm rocking a one-handed cartwheel. That's about all I got going on. Um, and I think that it can add to choreography if it's done correctly and put in the right place.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that it can also take away if used in genres or in ways and value. So something that I always talk to my kids about is we want to be adding value as we're performing. So we don't want to be taking value away. So as long as what we're choosing to do and how we're choosing to do it is adding value to the piece from beginning to end, then we're doing it justice. So I think that it can be used. I mean, I have a piece this year that I have a few acro type skills in. Um, and I wanted to use them to add to the piece, add to the storytelling, not use them as a means to score points. So
yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
all in the intention, not, well, I'm trying to get points, so I'm going to put in these acro skills. And just like anything, I tell the kids like these days with when it comes to like turning, jumping, leaping, acro, everybody can do all kinds of stuff. So those
yeah.
things are no longer impressive. What has now
Right.
become impressive is being able to stand for 2 8 counts and maintain eye contact and breathe and still be alive on stage. That's what's now become impressive, not being able to do an entire group doing, you know, aerials crossing each other and diving underneath each other at the same time. So I think
Yeah.
it's, you know, I think it can be used, but I don't think that it's needed.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to highlight
Thank
also
you.
transitions. I think transitions are such a big it makes such a difference between when you see the team that's out there just pulling tricks because they can versus
Yeah.
what you said, what is the intent. It really integrate, if it can integrate seamlessly into a piece and it makes sense from beginning to end, like you said, transitions can make all the difference in the world and how successful that is. So I think that's a big one to touch on as well. Um, I am chatting with Kelsey Nelson Lack. We're talking about how to balance the line between artistry and technique for our performance athletes. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Make sure you hit the like button, the follow button. Drop your comments and questions for Kelsey in the chat. If you have any questions for her, if you're a dance educator out there and you're not sure how to navigate this and balance this out with your students, this is a to ask. Happy to answer any questions you all have throughout this conversation. That's why we're here, and make sure you're sharing this conversation within your community as well. What point do you start pulling in artistry beyond the technique? So you talked about it can, your older kids kind of can master that around 14, 15. They start really getting a grip on what artistry means, what that looks like, and they really have that deeper understanding. But how young are they when you start introducing that concept? Because I imagine it's not just 14, 15, bam, they get it. It's because you've done the work to integrate this into their training in some capacity while not smacking them over the head with it.
Right.
So
Um,
how young?
well, I mean, I do improv with the kids. I
Nice.
think that's a great introduction. I don't let them just go across the floor and do whatever they want. I always give them a lot of parameters, and starting them young, they know like the number one rule is no technical skills. So they can't do any technical skills. So I'm like, I don't want to see a pirouette. I don't want to see a batma. I don't want to see a soda shot.
That
I don't want to
has
see
to
any of those
eat
things.
them alive, though. That has to like kill their soul, because
Well,
that when you say that to a younger kid, that all they want to do is turn, you're like, stop. But it works. Like they just go,
yeah.
okay, Miss
So
Kelsey.
I give them parameters. So one of the first, so this week we actually, I worked on improv, and I would say like, I mean, we're talking like 7, 8 years old. Like start to get them moving. Even in my younger kid classes, we'll do freeze dance, and
So
I'll do
fun.
things like, okay, now do different animals. So with my little kids, I'll be like, okay, dance like a butterfly, this. And so I'll name different things, and it gets them starting to like tap into a different part of their brain to create the movement rather than it being so black and white. And then
Yeah.
with the little kids, I'll say something like, okay, let's dance like a color. So, what does the color red say to you? And they'll raise their hand and say what red means to them. And I'm like, okay, now I want you to incorporate doing a chasse and dancing like the color red. So then they're, okay, how do I move?
Okay.
And then also add in a skill. So getting them
I
to
love
start to
that.
like connect those things. Um, when I get to my like, like 9, 10-year olds and older, like giving them deeper concepts. Like this week, I talked about, okay, I want you to move through the space like how bubbles move. So
Yeah.
how would those move? And giving them that. Okay, now how does lightning move? Okay, move like that. So it just gets them thinking in a different way, still not using any skills, but getting them to start moving and really being aware of it. And I even talked to them about how in improv, we can't just go and not be present. We've got to be aware
Yeah.
of what we're doing, but we can't pre plan what we're doing. So getting them in that headspace of kind of like letting go, but also like, okay, I need to hold myself accountable, was a really great, and their improv actually got better after we had that conversation, because they weren't rushing through it.
Yeah.
So they were, really like taking the time to be like, okay, I need to make sure when I'm stepping through that I'm not like turning my foot in or whatever that they're doing. So I think it's being able as an educator to give them that freedom, but then also give them like one little technical piece. And technique is not a pirouette per se. Technique is like, how are you moving through your plie? Technique is
Yes.
like, how are you working through the floor? So, like, those things are technique. So, I think getting the kids to understand that as technique, and a pirouette is a skill, a technical skill, but it's a
Yeah.
skill nonetheless. So, I think integrating those two and really getting them to understand that, at a younger age starts to get them on that path. So then they really, when they are solid with their like technical foundational training, then they really have freedom to just kind of like throw caution to the wind, like I said earlier, and go for it. So
Yeah,
that's kind of what
I
I
love
do.
it. I'm hearing three things. So you're making it fun for them. You're getting their minds wrapped around dance is more than just the steps. It's the mechanics, right? It's more than that, and it's being able to do that those two things at the same time. And you're introducing those concepts early, which I love. And it doesn't mean they're going to be perfect at it,
Oh no.
but it's going to be in their vocabulary as they grow and mature and they grow into their bodies. But I want to say, like, back to your comment about intent matters, instead of using free dance as a way to like eat up the last 10 minutes of class, like you're being very intentional with why you're doing free dance, right? Which is, I think, the difference between a really seasoned educator and somebody who's just kind of finding their voice. So make sure you're even using those games can be used to introduce these concepts to these younger kids. We have some really good questions on Instagram coming in. The first one from Winters Hannah: how do you encourage middle schoolers to focus on the value of technique when they just want to do tricks? When we were talking about this earlier too, because that's what they see on social media. So they
Yeah.
really want to do those things and they feel like they're less than if they or don't. How do you deal with that? Thank
I
you,
think
Hannah, for the question.
I think it's getting them to really value the process,
Yeah.
and that takes time. It's understanding that there is so much more, and so I would encourage you to even be able to find, like, ask them. Like I always ask them, like, who's a dancer that you really respect, you watch and are just in complete awe of, and I'll tell them to like bring their name in, and I'll look them up on Instagram, and we'll
Uh,
watch a video, and I'll be like, okay, what are you seeing? What do you see them doing? And start asking them questions, because then you're going to see what they're valuing and what they're looking for. And um, you might be surprised, because they might say how they moved or how they used the music or that kind of stuff, but they don't realize that that is the artistic realm. Um, so getting them to really talk to you and see what they're seeing is going to help you as a teacher to kind of veer your training,
yeah.
and give them a combo that has like no like technical stuff in it, and give it to them, and like make it fun and make it exciting, and see what they get out of the class. And then after that, be like, did you realize that like you didn't do a pirouette? Did you realize that you didn't like do some crazy leap? And so giving them that and making it fun and making it exciting will help them understand that, oh, there's value in this too. And then you can start to marry those things together, and it doesn't have to be all focused on skills all the time. I do technique progressions and like really focus on technique, but I also want them to dance. So, like, one of their
Yeah.
big things, like, we need to dance this across the floor. If I put this in a piece, how would you do it? And so, getting them to understand that. And then another day of the week, giving them a combo that's mostly movement and artistic based, and getting them to work on that. So, really pushing them in both directions rather than just focusing on one helps them kind of understand the value of both. But I would say be in conversation with them and ask them who inspires them and why.
Yeah. I love it. And your across the floors are brilliant, by the way. I've watched so many of your across the floors and I'm like, God, she is a genius.
Thanks.
But we have another one, lots of engagement on Instagram. Rinch and Nagmo14, thank you for the question. What is the way to engage emotions more into the performance? And I think they might be asking about this for the students, but if not, clarify and we'll answer that too. But how do you get them to engage more emotion into their performance?
We really work, we journal. So we journal every single class. So I think
Oh,
that that
wow.
helps them. I set aside 7 minutes at the beginning of every class for them to journal. So I think that that has started
At
to
seven
help
minutes?
them. Yeah, like 5 to 7 minutes, just right at the
Okay.
beginning, nothing too long. Um, and I think that's helped them start to tap into feelings and tap into emotions. And so it's helped them then be more open and vulnerable as they're dancing. Um, and getting them to understand the motivation of the piece. And I don't think that it has to be the same. And I don't think every kid needs to have the same motivation. I think when it's allowed to be personal, it brings out way more than giving them an exact thing. Um, I was having trouble getting a group of kids to perform, and I was like, okay, pick a movie
Uh-huh.
that you really connect to. And then, okay, how can you make this dance depict that movie from beginning to end? And you only have 2.5 minutes. So it put them in like the first part. And so
Yeah.
they were like, oh, I'm going to act this. And it really like put it over the edge.
That's so
Or I'll be
interesting.
like, yeah, or I'll be like, make fun of this choreography. So make it like a comedy, like how extreme. You get to make fun of what I made up. Do it. And they go so over the top that it like actually is like, that's how we should be doing it.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of different ways to get them to really tap into it when it comes to any type of like, I don't want to say darker piece, but any more emotional piece, getting them to find a personal connection, and then not be afraid to share that with the class. So allowing them to be vulnerable and verbally share it, really helps. Last night we ran a piece, that I choreographed. I had an ex student whose dad tragically passed away unexpectedly,
Oh,
and she never got to say goodbye. And that's what the song is about, never getting to say goodbye to somebody. So a lot of these kids have never experienced that. So they're not going to
right.
be able to tap into that feeling. Um, and so, even saying like, what would it feel like if you never got to dance again? What would it feel like
Mhm.
if, you never got to talk to your best friend again? If they were just gone, maybe they moved, maybe something happened, and getting them to think about how that would feel and then bringing that rather than me telling them explicitly, this is how you need to feel, because that might not be how they feel. So just getting those different, I don't want to say tricks, but those different ways that I've done to get the kids to kind of like tap into it. There's not going to be one right way that you need to do for every single. I think it depends on the kids, it depends on the style of dance, but you've just got to play around with it. And then once you get it, be like that how that felt. Okay, now we need to work from that space. And when they can feel it personally, then they start to understand that. And then you really have a starting point to really develop from there.
Yeah, thank you all so much for the questions. Those were great questions. This I'm Bree with Apolla, chatting with Kelsey Nelson Lack today about how to walk the line between balancing artistry and technique for our performance athletes. This is a big one as we head into the competition season. Make sure we have a little bit more time with Kelsey so she's answering any questions you have throughout the conversation, but also make sure you like or subscribe to our pages for more Beyond the Steps, and pop your questions for Kelsey in the chat on any of the platforms. Again, we're live on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a big one. So I'm gonna go all out and I'm just gonna ask it. And this will be our last question before we get into homework. So oftentimes in the competitive space, I've through a lot of competitions, and I know you have too. We see pieces with a theme that is questionable, to say the least, and frankly can be very uncomfortable to watch as an audience member and even for our judges at these events, right? For example, you see some spoken word pieces that, about protest, or pieces about death and loss, um, suicide, things that are very triggering for people, right?
Right.
Um, Ignoring the psychological impact that might have for the audience itself, right? And how this plays into the dancers, how much is too much? um, for where should an educator draw the line between the need to tell their story and their vision at the expense of their students, or maybe those students are just not old enough to grasp this concept?
Right. So, I think that we've got to realize that we're creating for children.
Yeah.
So we're creating for kids most of the time, most of us. Um, and there is a space, I believe, for all of those topics when it
Yeah,
comes to adult performers that
absolutely.
understand and can create that distinction between um, presenting a message, um, having it personally impact you, all of those kinds of things. When it comes to kids, like I just referenced a piece that I choreographed about
Yep.
not being able to say goodbye. Now, that song can be interpreted a lot of different ways. Where it came from for me was that personal space of my student that was not put onto my students. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? I
Yes.
explained where it personally was coming
Yes.
from and what motivated my choreography. But I want them to be able to make that piece their own.
Yes.
If we pick these topics that are unrelatable to a lot of dancers, then they're being forced down a road of trying to understand something that they have no way of understanding.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you're going to get an authentic, genuine performance. And so I always try to steer away from them. As a judge watching them, it does become uncomfortable
Yeah.
because we're trying to give feedback to better the dancers' training, their art, like their artistry, their technique, and to critique a piece that is
Yes.
strong topic feels inappropriate. Um,
Yes.
it feels like I shouldn't be critiquing you when you're talking about
Mhm.
social issues, or when you're talking about suicide, or when you're talking about any laws or anything like that that people feel controversial about. I don't think that that's the space for me to critique that. So then it makes my job very hard as a judge,
Yeah.
because I want to be able to help you be better, but I don't feel comfortable in that space. So I
Yeah.
think if you're wanting to take something to competition and get that feedback and get critiques, um, a space so that kids can connect to and understand on a personal level. And if you're wanting to create a show, create an experience, and feel that those students can do that, then create that separately. But I just wouldn't personally on stage.
Yeah, and the same could be said for costuming, but that's another day. We will talk about that another time. But yeah, and I love what I'm hearing you say too is that you really go the extra mile. Like for example, that student that you were saying had lost her family member. You realize like everybody doesn't identify with that. That's a unique case, right? But you're putting in the work and the time to make sure that the kids can identify it in some way and in a relatable way that makes sense that their brains can compute, right? And I
Yes,
think it's putting in that going above and beyond with pieces like that if you are going to do them to make sure that everybody's thinking about it in the right way and that it's not just tell my story the way I have it in my head because that can backfire most times. I think it
right.
backfires. But that is a good place to end that. And I want I feel like I could talk to you for hours about just all the things that you've gone through and experienced. But before we go into homework, I want to make sure you guys can hear all of our full episodes available on Facebook at Apolla Performance in the live video section, on IG Reels, and also in YouTube, Apolla Performance and TP Dance Creations. Make sure you're following both of those accounts, and you can see our complete all 3 seasons of episodes are on there. There is some great content from really, really amazing, incredible, well qualified people. Everything that we do is evidence based. And so I really highly suggest that you take a look at all of our past episodes, season 1, 2, and 3. And make sure to follow and subscribe too. So Kelsey, every week, as you know, we like to give homework for people to just make a small change, take a baby step forward to improve in the topic that we're talking about. What is one thing you want to challenge everybody that listened today or might be listening on the playback to work on between now and next week to make some progress in this regard?
Yeah, I would say have a conversation with your students. Ask them what is valuable in having a strong technical foundation, what is valuable in having strong artistry, and how can you bring those two things together. I'm in a big space of always talking to the kids and seeing where they're at. And I think understanding what value they have and what value they're putting on things really helps you as a teacher be able to change where you're putting your value and where you're working to help kind of bridge the gap between the two. Um, and I would say challenge them this next week or two and do a combo that like doesn't have a lot of technique in it. And in terms of skills. Really challenge them with movement, with storytelling. Um, give them space to really improv and see what result you get versus doing something that has a bunch of skills
I love
in
that.
it. And just really see. Also, think about the music that you're using. I'm huge about music. And so we just did a combo to a song called More that's talking time and more healing and more love and more us and all of that kind of stuff. Um, and watching the kids really dance to that and connect to that, wanting more time with their teammates and more time with their friends and knowing, that it's always limited, like brought out something different in them. So pick a song that has an uplifting message, that has something that the kids can connect to, create a combo that doesn't have a lot of skills in it, and just give them the space to dance this week and see what happens because I think that you'll be rather surprised.
Thank you. So that's your homework from Miss Kelsey Nelson Lack. Make sure you go home and do it. Let us know how it works for you. We always like hearing, the progress that people are making after watching these shows and hearing from our guests. So let us know. In the meantime, I want to challenge you all to do some homework as well. Take our Steps Initiative course. This is an online free, all capital letters course module that highlights all the topics we talked about earlier, like racism, gender inequities, sex abuse and prevention, dance medicine and science, psychology, nutrition. Every course was curated by experts in their field. And again, it is completely free. I'm going to drop that link in for you. Consider it professional development. And by no means is it everything you need to know, but it is going to establish a nice foundation and give you a jumping off point to dig further. And again, we want to create those happier, healthier spaces in dance and for all of our performance athletes as well. Kelsey, how can people get in touch with you if they want to book you to consult, to master classes, judging, anything? How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, so sorry, on Instagram, you can follow me, KJN Dance, and my email is the same. So at gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook. Um, and so, yeah, you can reach out any of those ways. I'd be happy to chat, send you information, provide you anything that I can or any insight that I have. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this hopefully for the same reason to develop good
Yeah.
human beings. And I'm happy to help.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here again. It's always such a wonderful conversation when we get to have you on. And thank you to all of you out there who have taken time to watch or will be watching this on the playback. We appreciate it. Make sure you're sharing and clicking that subscribe button. We're going to be turning Beyond the Steps into a podcast at the end of the year. So look for that. We're going to be turning it into blogs. So look for that every episode. We're going to be putting all of these resources on the Apolla website for you. And so make sure you're following us and subscribing to our email so you can get that information. Go to apollaperformance.com. For those of you that are wondering, we are finally coming back in stock after our amazing run with Shark Tank. We aired on April 1st and sold out in 15 minutes, and we are just now coming back in stock. We could not be more excited. So get your Apolla socks in time for the holiday. apollaperformance.com. They make great stocking stuffers, and they're for anybody in your life that needs support, not just dancers, everybody. So check those out. Next week, we are going to be, I'm gone, actually. Melissa's gone this week, and I miss her. Shout out to Melissa McDaniel Grisham, my fabulous friend and co-host. I missed her this week, but she is going to be going solo because I'm out of town. So she's going to be talking about the challenges facing twirlers of color and how we work together to overcome them. We're going to be chatting with Olivia Lynch, who's the co-founder of Black Baton Twirlers Network. So this is a totally different path. I think it's going to be a great conversation. I hope you tune in. That's next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Until then, we hope you continue your journey beyond the steps, and everybody have a wonderful weekend. Bye.